When I was researching one film, I was like getting really, 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 really deep into stuff. And I remember I was on this airplane being like, oh yeah, of course. Like, of course these spiritualists weren't talking to dead people. They were talking to elemental spirits, obviously. And then I was like, dude, like, you need to calm down.
Got to pull it back a little bit.
Yeah. I grew up in New England, and I'm sure this sounds kind of precious, but it's true that New England's past was always a part of my consciousness. And, you know, like there's all these crumbling colonial farmhouses and hidden graveyards in the woods and stuff. As a sensitive kid who got beat up for wearing costumes to school, we would go on like family trips to like Colonial Williamsburg and Plymouth Plantation, things that a lot of people thought maybe were boring. I fucking loved it. You know, I was like, yeah, like I want to be a blacksmith. This is great. And I love talking to the living history nerds. Like I thought it was the coolest thing. I was definitely in an environment that was easy to cultivate an interest in the past. You know, my father was a Shakespeare professor. My grandfather was very interested in the past and collected antiques. This Latvian-American painter, Hyman Bloom, who seemed like a wizard to me and was very, I didn't totally understand this at the time, but was very into the occult and theosophy. And
Where'd you find his stuff?
Well, he was doing a show at the University of New Hampshire because he lived in New Hampshire, and and my parents met him and became friends with him. But you know, he was doing these gigantic, like 6 or 8 foot tall charcoal drawings of demons on astral planes, and I was pretty blown away.
How old were you?
10. And at the time, like I was into comic books and stuff, and I was drawing them. And he gave me an Albrecht Dürer book and a Martin Schongauer and some other Northern Renaissance
like woodcut
guys. Yeah,
stuff?
Woodcuts and engravings. And he was like, you know, if you can draw these, you can draw anything. And that sort of was like, I practically took all my comic books and set them on fire. I didn't, you know, but I did literally kind of put them in file cabinets and became obsessive. Later on, I did a senior directed play of Nosferatu.
Right.
And he saw that and brought it to his theater to do a slightly more professional version of it. And, you know, and I think if there was anything still left over of commercial tastes, it kind of died with that Nosferatu.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. So Tim Burton was like a god of someone who was doing something different. And then, oh, wow, Terry Gilliam, like, that's really interesting. And then, David Lynch, what's that about? And like Mr. T, a.k.a. like Tarkovsky, who's obviously after a completely different thing than I am. But, of course, his technique and craft and his ability to articulate an atmosphere and memory and make that your own is something that like I try to like learn from. It's one of the finest films made technically. That bell casting sequence is probably one of the best things in cinema. Bergman, it's always like why? Yeah, wow, he put the camera there, but that is the perfect place. I would never think that that's exactly where you're supposed to put it, but that's the place. And again, it's unassuming. It's not, you're not like assaulted by the panache of the filmmaker. We're looking at so many different things, like Melville. He's inspiring stuff, which starts leading us into like Jean Delville and Arnold Buckland and Sascha Schneider. It also reminds me of a lot of Hyman Bloom drawings of the forests of Lubeck, Maine. Ralph looks like a wooden carving of a saint, like a Tillman Riemenschneider Northern Renaissance carving. It's such a great face. And the studio called us like the week before we were going to production saying, look, like we've seen the location, it's so beautiful, like you should probably shoot this in scope. Like, don't you think it's like super mannered to do this? And I basically was like talked about like Durer's like Apocalypse, like being in a vertical aspect ratio and like all of this like art history stuff for like 40 minutes until they're just like, okay, I don't even just get off the phone.
If you look at art history, there's not a lot of like CinemaScope paintings that are epic. You know, like Dürer can do the Apocalypse in a vertical format, and it's quite apocalyptic. It doesn't need to be in CinemaScope. maybe Kurosawa would have preferred to have a little more elbow room for The Seventh Samurai, but I think it looks pretty good. And Throne of Blood looks amazing.
If you look at the history of painting, like, painters or photography, painters and photographers will tell you there's different canvases for different images. And I think if filmmakers could destroy cinemas and televisions and rebuild them new for every story they were telling, there would be films in a lot more different aspect ratios. I had the taste of a f***ing dilettante since I was a little kid. I don't know what to say. It's like saying all that makes me want to vomit. I'm trying to, as best I can, take my influences and digest them through some alchemical process into something new. I like archetypal storytelling. Archetypal stories are the stories that stick around because there's like truths about them and you can reinterpret them for like any age and they just work.
I'm gonna save you, Father! I'm gonna save you, Mother! I'm gonna kill you, Father!
By trying to have it be all about the time period in which it's set in instead of making any kind of concessions for a contemporary audience, I feel like I have a stronger chance of it being timeless.
I like the dirty windows. Yeah. We had to shoot The Witch on Alexa for financial reasons, and when I look at it, it feels naked in a way that really bothers me.
I love being transported to the past when I read books and watch films, and so I try to do the same thing for an audience. I like doing things historically accurately, or attempting to. That doesn't make it better, but it is what I like to do, because I feel that it grounds me in the film, and I also feel that it's, in some ways, it's a shortcut to having as many details as possible, because you don't have to waste time inventing things. You can just find them. It's not like, what's the coolest chair? It's like, let's make a museum replica of that chair. I love researching. And it just does bring me complete joy. I need to know the material well enough so that I can be integrated into something that can be mine. If I was like J.R.R. Tolkien and was that kind of genius and had that kind of time on my hands, I could create something that specific. But generally, it's not going to be as specific as the real thing. Let's recreate it to the best of our ability. We have a huge amount of detail, more detail than we could have if we had conjured it up.
He's beautiful with this period detail.
Yeah.
It's not showy. He makes the world without pointing at it. It's like he lives in it. He trusts it.
Working with Robert Eggers, his attention to detail and the importance of it being historically accurate is 100%. I've never been more immersed in a project than this.
I don't do anything that I am not insanely passionate about. Spent so much time researching the world of the 17th century and had such a clear idea of the house, but they exceeded my expectations. I cried when I saw it for the first time. But again, all this isn't just fussy, nerdy stuff. I mean, it is, but it's all to create an atmosphere. It's all to transport us further back into time.
Each detail in and of itself doesn't matter, but 1,000 details has a gravitational pull towards excellence.
So it's all for a reason, not just because we're huge nerds. There's a lot of stuff that should carry more weight because of that authenticity. And when you have this atmosphere and this world that you can believe in, then you can believe in the witch and mermaids and sea monsters a little more. In order to actually transport an audience to another world, this has to be so personal to me. Every single frame needs to be as if I'm articulating my memory. The other thing, too, is that I'm never trying to make a movie with a message, because my whole sort of way in is, how do I present the mindset of the people in this world, in this period, without judgment? We have to be in the mindset of these English Calvinists, or it's never going to work. The dead speak loudly to me.
He had disappeared, not 1 week past, yet you and Mother utter not his name.
Thinking in dialect does get you to sort of think outside yourself and express things differently in a way. All of a sudden you see, okay, they're human like me. And finally you can unlock this door where you realize, oh my goodness, if I was alive then, I would have thought exactly like them. Of course I would have. And not only that, like I can see how that kind of thinking still resonates in culture today. That for me is the most exciting moment. As much as I try to get into the mindset of the people of that period, it is slightly impossible. And people's understanding of the past is also always changing. So it finally is only going to be a mirror of the mindset of today, using the lens of the past to reflect back on ourselves.
Would you ever consider doing a contemporary movie?
I doubt it.
If I made a contemporary film, I think I would be very bored.
I'm more interested in these worlds than I am even in filmmaking. The stories that tend to, today, speak to like who we are and where we're going culturally and philosophically and spiritually, if you will, tend to be science fiction movies, which makes perfect sense because of like, numbers, God, and computers like run our life and all this stuff. But I'm interested trying to explore those questions in the past. But I would be interested in doing a science fiction movie, but I think that anytime I've tried to think of something, it's kind of like a version of Solaris or On the Silver Globe again, or some kind of mashup of it. And it's just kind of like, I don't know how I would think of something that hasn't been done. The world in that feels so like intact and believable and entirely, but I don't know if I could do it. Thankfully, like Denis doing it and you're doing it, so I get to enjoy it.
Well, what is it in the 21st century that draws you to old myth?
Probably the commercial, secular, nihilistic worldview that we live in, and sort of being reactionary against that.
I don't know what you mean.
There's not a lot of magic and mystery.
Do those ancient myths like witches and mermaids, do they still have the power they used to have over us?
They do over me. We need these stories to understand who we are as humans.
Something that I tried to do was like capture the feeling of Disney fairy tales, and which they're dark and they're enigmatic and they're mysterious and they aren't like simple, but they have a real power to them that sticks with you. Witch is still very much alive in the unconscious of everyone today. Like she absolutely is.
In looking at the past, I'm trying to find things to incorporate into my films that the threads of them we're still connected to them, like unconsciously or semi-consciously, but it's not part of our everyday experience. If we can access those, it can be kind of a small awakening. For some people, it really works, and that hair becomes like creepy and strange in a way that they can't quite understand. Whether or not, you think that evil witches only exist in, the mind of the ignorant, the belief in that was so strong for such a long period of time that those ramifications, went all through history, and the shadows of it still survive today.
It's more this idea of this spirit world full of beings of various kinds and the gods and so on, that to the characters in the film is absolute reality. It's not something you believe in, it's just there.
There is supernatural thought in everyone's everyday life.
There's no Viking atheists. It's not, do you believe in the gods? Do you believe in giants? It's like, they exist.
And it's up to the viewer to decide whether they are just simply the fantasies or hallucinations of the characters, or whether it's real. But what is very clear is that for them, it's completely real, because there's nothing unnatural about all of these creatures and spirits and so on. They're deeply natural.
In the early modern period, the real world and the fairy tale world were the same thing.
The idea is if I can really bring you back to the 17th century when witches existed, like you can believe in her the way they did as a given. She's as real as trees, as rocks, as dirt. She's the real deal.
My DP asked me what my biggest fears were, and one of them is believing. Because I think because now we're saying in the earlier I was saying I want to believe, and now I'm saying believing leads but can lead to madness.
Absolutely.
And that's
what The Witch is about.
Well, sure, and I think that's certainly what The Lighthouse is about.
Yeah,
whatever that's about. But most occultists, unless they are 100% charlatans, end up mad and penniless.
you know, because once you believe, it's real. Folklore, fairy tales, mythology, religion, sometimes the occult, that's what turns me on the most.
And all that really has to do with the past, which weirdly may somehow be my biggest passion.
Even more than cinema, and I really, 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 really love cinema.
There's complicated things about organized religion, but there's also complicated things about, like, in an entirely secularized society, we lose the sublime and the sacred sometimes. And so I find that what really excites me is to kind of understand where we're coming from and where we're going from where we came from, and to try to go back into the past to think about ideas that are bigger than ourselves.
Living in a religious or mythological system where every single thing around you is imbued with significance is appealing to me. The only reason why I can see that everyone's so obsessed with superheroes is that that's like the pagan pantheon for today. Comic-Con becomes these great religious festivals where people like impersonate the gods that they worship. You know? I mean, it's like...
But what's missing is the idea of genuine belief.
True. And I guess that's what I'm maybe searching for in the work that I do.
No, I feel that.
The past is a dark and distant mirror where we shockingly and sadly keep seeing ourselves.
This patriarchal, extreme, violent culture is horrifying. But then you say, we haven't changed. We have not changed at all. Mm-hmm. And that is the most depressing thing.
That human nature may be barbaric, and the possibility of change is futile in a way, almost?
It is futile. It's 100% futile. Like, there's nothing, you have to be a pessimist as a realist. You know, just open your eyes.
Mm-hmm. Or at the very least, a cynic.
You have to choose to be an optimist anyway. You have to always fight against it.